Last episode ended with one question. Wait, what's a power bottom? And judging by some of the comments and the messages I got, a whole lot of y'all wanted to know too. Now, before anybody gets offended again, let me remind y'all these are his experiences, these are his opinions, this is his world. I'm just a woman on the phone listening to the man asking questions. And baby, I had questions. I had a lot of questions because somewhere in that conversation, this man said something that completely threw me off. He said some of the most masculine men, the men women would never suspect, the men with deep voices, the muscles, the beards, the alpha male energy. They're the ones that are not always what people think they are. Now, hold on, because that's not what most people think. Most people think masculinity looks one way and only one way. And according to him, that's not always true. So naturally, I started asking questions. And that's when he said, power bottom. Baby, I stopped him immediately. I said, wait, what? What is a power bottom? And according to him, a power bottom is a male who can take rough action and they love it. They're dominant. They're in control. And baby, that's when I got confused because that is not what I expected him to say. Then he took it a step further. He says some of the most masculine men out here. You guessed it, the deep voices, the muscles, the beards, the alpha males. Those are some of the very men women would never suspect. I said, no, I don't believe you. He said, no, I'm serious. And that's when I almost dropped my coffee because that completely changed everything that I thought I knew. I had heard that term before, but I really never knew what it was. What surprised me was how many assumptions I realized I had been making. Because according to him, confidence doesn't always look that way. Masculinity does not always look one way. Dominance doesn't always look one way. And real life doesn't always match up to stereotypes. Some of these stereotypes, people will carry them around in their heads. It doesn't mean it's true. And then the conversation got crazier because I asked him about men who still call themselves straight. And baby, this is where some of y'all are going to throw your phone because according to him, some men have created their own rule book, their own categories, their own definitions. And while he was explaining it, all I could think was, y'all got a lot of loopholes. That's what this is. It's loopholes. So you're telling me some men think because they give and don't receive that they're still straight? According to him, yes. Some men have created their own categories, their own definitions, their own rules. All I could think was, y'all got a whole rule book. Then we started talking about men who give and men who receive. I was lost again because according to him, some men believe that if they only do one thing and not the other, that somehow changes the label. And the more he explained it, the more questions I had. Now, whether y'all agree with it or not, that's not the point. What fascinated me most was how people create definitions that help them live their lives with the choices they are making. And honestly, people do that in every area of life. Relationships, money, cheating, family. People create their own rules that they can live with. And according to him, this world is no different. Then he started introducing me to words I had never heard before. Poppers, prep. I didn't know what these were. And every 5 minutes, I was like, what? Hold on. Back up. Explain that to me again. Then the conversation took another turn. Now, I wasn't ready for this one. We started talking about preparation. I said, preparation for what? And that's when he explained that some people actually clean themselves before they become intimate. Now, hold on, because I had never even thought about that. But naturally, it makes sense. So, had more questions. I said, wait a minute now, people are really doing all that beforehand? He went on to say that for some people, that's just a part of getting ready. And at that point, I wasn't judging, I was just curious. The more questions I asked, the more that I realized there are entire conversations happening that most people will never hear discussed openly. And baby, this is definitely one of those moments. Then we got into health. We got into testing, protection, prep. And the one thing that I respected was he was serious about his health. He was serious about knowing his status. He was serious about testing and protecting himself. Because whether people want to admit it or not, every community has conversations about health, risk, and responsibility. And this one was no different. Then I asked him something else. I said, is there anything you won't do? Because at this point, I had heard enough. I had heard enough to know that everybody doesn't want the same thing. Everybody does not want the same thing. Everybody doesn't like the same thing. Everybody doesn't have the same boundaries. And that's exactly what he told me. He started talking about things he would never do. Things other people asked for. Things he thought were crazy. And that's when I realized something. There isn't one experience. There isn't one story. There isn't one set of rules. There are people drawing lines in different places all over the map. And then somehow, don't ask me how we got there. We ended up talking about the prostate. I don't know how we got there. Now, I'm going to tell y'all right now, this conversation was not on my bingo card. Not even a little bit. But it led to something bigger. So I had to know. I said, in your opinion, why do some men choose other men? And without hesitation, he said, because men know what men want. Now that answer stopped me for a second. Now, not because I agreed or disagreed, but because he was so confident when he said it. He said men understand each other differently, that they speak the same language, that they recognize things in each other that women might miss. And I remember sitting there thinking, now that's an interesting perspective. Because whether you agree with it or not, it's a point of view a lot of people have probably never heard explained out loud. So I kept asking questions. I wanted to know what made him feel that way. I wanted to know where that belief came from. And the deeper we got into the conversation, the more I realized there are a lot of assumptions being challenged on both sides of the table. Whew. We weren't talking about assumptions, things that people think they know, the things people never ask, the things people are curious about but too embarrassed to talk about. And if this interview taught me anything, it taught me curiosity will teach you a lot more than judgment ever will. Because the more I asked questions, the less I felt like I knew. And the more I realized how many people spend their lives arguing about things they don't actually understand. Some people are arguing about labels. Some people are arguing about assumptions, arguing about stereotypes. And some people are arguing about things they never even taken the time to learn. Now, whether you agree with this man or not, one thing is certain. He challenged a lot of assumptions, mine included. And honestly, that was the point. Not to make everybody agree, not to make everybody comfortable, but to have a conversation that people aren't having. To talk about the things people don't say out loud, the things that people whisper about, the things that people assume they understand. And baby, if this conversation made you uncomfortable, good. Because uncomfortable conversations are exactly why Classy Punk exists. I'll see y'all next time. And until then, keep your audacity on 10.